and then like whatever feels.
I'll
like,
ask you something about it, or we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
That reminds me of this one time.
Honestly, whatever.
Great
approach.
I love it.
Yeah.
It'll be fun. Cool.
Seth Power.
Oh yeah, dude. Going deep.
There's not many of us.
In my life, they're popping up, dude.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Like
I don't know.
mushrooms?
Yeah. Like we got a leader in the hikerdose community who helps lead hikes. Also Seth.
Seth.
Yeah.
Okay.
You. There's one other, but
what percentage are Jewish?
I don't even know.
You don't even know. Yeah.
I don't even know.
I always thought it was.
I don't keep a track of people like that as much. Maybe when you are Jewish, that's like a thing.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I'm just 100% European mutt, so I don't know. Whatever. But I do think that is a really interesting element of like the book too, where it's like that in group, like they all. Well, I hope we'll get into that too.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately now more than ever, like it's sort of like that's. I mean, literally every conversation I have with Jews, someone says, "Well, why? Like, I'm not Jewish. I don't act Jewish. I'm not religious.
Yeah.
I'm not cultured." But like, well, in the rest of the world's eyes, that's all you are. That's an overstatement, but like,
no, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
it's the most obvious, or it's the
for
most
some
standout.
people.
Yeah,
and it's something I never had to think about.
Right.
And then, I went to Hungary and recognized, like, oh, I'm definitely a Jew here.
Interesting. Were you thinking about getting into this at all, or no? You're gonna kind of avoid that.
Oof.
I don't know, because you mentioned it on our call, so I just wanted to touch.
I think it has to be named.
Yeah.
And like, I honestly don't have political opinions.
Yeah.
Because I don't even know how to crack that nut.
You didn't before, so why would you now? Kind of like.
Yeah, I also feel like this touches on the punk thing too. It's like, I've never been a true believer in anything. I've never been able to stand up and say, this is right. This is 100% right, and I'm 100% for it. I've never felt that in my life. So the way I talk about that, and I'm glad you made it, is, look, this is a book about how ancestral trauma governed my actions in ways of which I was not aware and that were harmful to myself and the people I love.
Yeah.
Are there any examples of that currently occurring in the world?
That's a great segue. Yeah.
So I'll say this off mic, but yeah, there's more. Yeah.
Oh man.
Totally.
Well. Good thing you waited.
I know.
Yeah, I like that thread a lot, that we were kind of going down and with the mystery of psychedelics they open us up to. And yeah,
I really feel the mystery is necessary.
Yeah.
Like, I think when we get into the white lab coats and like everything's going to be safe and you're going to feel better, we lose a lot.
Yeah. I hope let's make a little space for that.
Say again?
Okay. We're running late. Yeah.
We can get started.
Let's do it. Okay.
Hello. Hi. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Alembic. It's so nice to have you all here. Raise your hand if you've never been to the Alembic before.
What?
Wow, that's so many people. Welcome. Yay. It's so fantastic to have you all here. Just to orient you to this space, the Alembic is a nonprofit, obviously here in Berkeley, and we opened a few years ago, and we are dedicated to transformative processes. So if you have ever heard of an alembic before, an alembic is an alchemical vessel which is used to transform substances, such as minds. And so that's what we aim to do here, is provide space for transformational experiences through lectures, through meditation, through classes. And so I'm so excited to share this experience with you. I'm sure there has been a transformative process that you have undergone. So I'm really excited to welcome Seth Lorinczi, who is here to speak about his new book, Death Trip, a Post-Holocaust Psychedelic Memoir. I've heard this book is courageous and also hilarious. So I'm so excited to learn more about this journey that you have been on. It's also Seth's first book, which was published in May?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. So we're really early on in getting to experience this talk. So very grateful for that. A little bit about Seth is that he is a Portland-based writer and journalist. He grew up in Washington, D.C. in the punk scene in the 80s and 90s. He later migrated west and began a career in food journalism. He also co-founded Judaism and the Psychedelic Renaissance, which is a first of its kind annual event in Portland, and one that I really hope to attend at some point now that I know that it exists. Sounds really awesome. Seth is joined tonight by another Seth. This is Seth Warner, who is the force behind Myco Rising, a group that is helping people integrate the gifts of plant medicines into daily life, and is aiming to build connective, conscious community. Seth is a community builder, an author, and an educator in Oakland, and he has played a key role in decriminalizing entheogenic plants and fungi and teaching people how to grow their own mushrooms. So very, very excited to welcome you both here for this conversation. And feel free to use the bathrooms down the hall to the right if you have to. And yeah, wonderful. Let's get started.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank all of you. It's a huge deal to have written this book and to be putting it out in the world and not knowing at all what kind of echoes will come back. And as Alana said, I did grow up in the punk scene, and what I learned there is that community is everything. And it's so sweet that so many people I've known for decades are here, and everything good that is happening with this book, and it's many things, happens because of the kindness of people, some that I've known for decades and some that I've just met, like Seth here, I would say as well. This is our first hangout, but A, the name, B.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of pressure, though. We have to do, it has to be just right.
Sure. Oh, man. Okay. Well, that said, yeah, I wrote a really fun book on the Holocaust. It's I sometimes call this talk Fun with Ancestral Trauma, or Ancestral Trauma Yay would be another one I'm trying out. But it's true. I started my writing career, if you will, in the Bay Area. I was a food journalist, which weirdly enough was great preparation for drinking ayahuasca. Not recommend, just on a culinary level. Just gonna put that out there. But being a food writer and a journalist did hone my desire to look deeper behind the surface, which was kind of latent at that point, and really, I think, has reached a culmination with this book. Those of you who lived in the Bay Area for a while may remember in the 90s, there was a spate of pie attacks on public officials. Yep, I see some heads nodding. And I was working as a food writer at that point, and I took it on myself to go down to the arraignment. And obviously, I had one question only. What kind of pie was it? Tofu cream pie. I mean, the most obvious choice for vegan activists. At least they didn't use pecan. That could have actually hurt someone. Anyway, my desire to go to look at subcultures that are underrepresented, I think, was the genesis behind this book. But as it turned out, I was not an impartial journalist. I was actually an active participant, and all through the writing process, I thought this book was many things. Oh, well, I'm going to talk about the psychedelic scene, or I'm going to tell my family's story. And what my writing partners told me over and over again was, this book is actually about you. It has to be about your story. And much as I didn't want to center that in the story, in the book, I had to. And it's really, really sweet to be sharing it with people and hearing over and over again from people I know and from strangers that they see themselves in it. So I'm going to give you little breadcrumbs about what the book is and where it goes and what this journey is about. And I would very, very much say that I love an open conversation. I feel self-conscious being the figure on the stage, even supported by another Seth. Questions, comments, things that rise up, say them, absolutely. Some of these readings have turned into 45-minute conversations with people that I've never met before, and that's a delight to me. Anyway, so here's the deal. In middle age, everything fell apart. I was married. I had a daughter who was about 10 years old at the time, and nothing was working. I had I'd say a pseudo career as a recording engineer and a musician. Wasn't really going anywhere. I felt disconnected from the people in my family, from my friends, and worst of all, my marriage was ending. My wife and I engaged with a therapist to try to make the process of separation easier, especially on our daughter. We went to a couple of couples counseling sessions that were more or less standard. And after the second one, the therapist said, "What would you think about trying one under the influence of MDMA?" And I wasn't aware this was a service she offered. What did we have to lose? First of many spoilers, my wife and I are still married. MDMA literally saved our marriage. But it awakened something else. I began to understand that maybe the way I was living my life, disconnected from the people around me, and disconnected from my heart, and disconnected from the people who had come before me, maybe that was having a real role in the here and now. I'd never been aware of it before. I grew up in a Jewish family that never, and I also want to pause here. This is a Jewish story. There's Holocaust in the title. But I very much urge all of you to insert your own story, belief, identification. This is not a purely Jewish story at all. The story of ancestral trauma, which is really the heart of this book, is a human story. It's not a Jewish story. Anyway, I grew up totally divorced from a backstory. We were Jewish, but no one would say it. The bookshelves of the house I grew up in were lined with thousands of books, many of them on Jewish trauma, dislocation, war, conflict, and yet no one ever put us in that story. And so I grew up surrounded by it, but never really knowing where I fit. And I'll read a little bit that tells you a little bit about how confusing this was, but also the first inkling that maybe there was a story that I wasn't being told, and there was more information for me. So when the book begins, it's actually my father's death, and I'm sorry, I'm going to out you. My sister is here, which is a huge, huge honor and treat for me. And my sister was there too at our father's passing. Anyway, this is in 1997. We were in Florida, where our father spent the last, half year of his life or so. And this was this moment when I had this sudden inkling that maybe there was something I wasn't being told. Well, it confirmed it. By the time I got to Florida, I'd more or less forgotten what little there was to be known of my family's backstory. This, of course, was according to my father's plan. I was meant to forget. But there was that single moment a few days before the end when I thought the door might finally crack open. My father and I were sitting in the living room. It was evening time, the last shadows of day stealing across the carpet. Beyond the sliding glass door, the Atlantic murmured and beckoned, but my father no longer seemed to care. Neither did I. I knew that soon he would end and the waves would continue. This thought became a Moebius strip, an abstraction looping in an endless stream. My father turned and gestured for me to come near. As I knelt beside him, he spoke haltingly. Do you remember the movie we watched? A day or two before, we'd started The Longest Day, the 1962 D-Day flick starring John Wayne and seemingly every other male actor. The story held special resonance for my father. In June of 1944, Hungary had just been occupied by the Germans, their former allies. Everyone knew that the Soviet onslaught was far closer and would be far uglier than an American-led one. Still, the news from Normandy stoked the faintest embers of hope. My father pressed on. Do you remember the scene where the Allied planes fly over the beach, over the German anti-aircraft guns? In an instant, every synapse snapped to attention. This was it. I was sure of it. This was the moment he'd finally spilled the story, the moment all those dangling threads would suddenly knit themselves together. The room suddenly felt much smaller, a cave half lit by torchlight. Humbled by this moment, one I'd longed for but never dared to expect, I drew even closer. Yes, I remember. Tell me. He croaked on. The German gunners rushed out. I waited. The German gunners. He paused for an eternity. The German gunners in the movie. My stomach clenched and unclenched itself like a fist. I didn't say a word. When they ran outside, he gathered himself one last time. Their belts were wrong. They should have had the equipment pouch on the right side, not the left. That's where they kept their entrenching tools. Exhausted, he sank back into the couch's embrace. Huh, I said. I would learn nothing more from him, at least not in the way I thought such things were learned. As suddenly as this portal had appeared, or appeared to have appeared, it was gone and it would not show itself again. A couple of days later, my father slipped into the fitful, days-long slumber preceding death, eventually dropping into a sleep so subterranean I had to strain to hear his exhalations. In the final minute of his life, his eyes suddenly snapped open, shockingly open as if they'd never before seen, in an expression of surprise bordering on stark terror. Up, straight up, past his family gathered around him, up through the oatmeal-textured ceiling, through the placid Floridian sky, to whatever awaited him next. So for 20 years, after that moment, the thread kind of ended. Father was gone. I went on with my life, and that was that. Until, of course, things came crashing to a halt, as I named earlier. And one thing that you and I talked about in our first conversation was the idea of initiation, and that how that's something we don't really have in our culture anymore. I suppose I could have been bar mitzvahed, but that wasn't really in the family plan. And even outside the Jewish world, that's not something we really have anymore. There's no marker to say you're connected with the people who came before you, and there's a tradition and there's a lineage. And you also have to step outside that, of course. You have to identify yourself as an individual and strike out on your own. But looking back on it, that was one of those moments for me, I suppose. Same way that growing up in the punk scene was my form of initiation, as you did too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure I fully grew up there, but I do really relate to this moment of, I'm just wondering, why didn't you just ask?
I know.
Like, and not to say that, but what is that in us, right? That moment where we realize we don't have a story or we don't know our story, but there's also, we haven't been given the power to ask, to wonder, or like to maybe even assume that those around us have the story. So I'm just curious, like, how is that holding the pressure of that pregnant question.
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny. Like when you say it, like, of course, it's kind of
like
the only question, actually. I just think about the sort of the silent signals that we all, I think our identities are formed more than anything by the stories we hear about ourselves. As young kids, even before we're verbal, people are describing us to others, to us, to the world. You're this kind of kid.
Yeah.
You're this kind of baby.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, well, actually for very clear reasons, in my family, that was the past. That happened in Europe, but we're in America now, and things are different, and we can leave all that behind, and that's never going to touch us anymore. And
but you were able to hold this question for 20 years or maybe longer. Do you feel that it was a fuel for you?
No, that's the thing. I fell asleep.
Okay.
I fell asleep is what happened.
Faded.
It was only when things were beginning to fall apart and I was looking for answers, like, why is my life suddenly not working? Everything was set up for me. I grew up in a very safe upper middle class household. Like, here's this path. Like, it's all been handed to you.
Yeah.
And yet over and over, something in me said, I'm not allowed to belong to this. And I had to find some other way.
So kind of feeling like an outsider, even in
always the outsider.
Yeah. So that kind of reminds me of the punk rock scene, right? Is this land of misfit toys?
The land of misfit toys, and I would say that's a Jewish story too, right? Like history's unbelongers, belonging only to their own tribe, and then sometimes not even that one too. It's funny. Before you all arrived, I was talking with Seth about the sections I read and the sections I don't read, and I was saying, well, I'm actually at a synagogue in a couple days, and there's things I'll read on Friday that I won't read here. And he said, oh, that makes me want to ask you to read those things here.
But don't read it. Don't read it. I don't. After you shared with me what it is, I don't think it's right for this crowd.
Wait, does that mean I'm really supposed to do it? I can't tell.
I don't know at this point. Okay. Trust your intuition, Seth.
Oh boy.
Do it.
MDMA. So here's a little game I like to play the audience as well. I don't know what you are here for. I don't know. Are you interested in the topic of ancestral trauma? Show of hands. Oh, good. Yeah, fun. Great. Great. Judaism, Jewish affairs. Okay, a lot of people. Psychedelics. Actually, currently on psychedelics.
Be honest.
No judgment. Like you thought it was an elderberry gummy. Who knows? Okay. So you did warn me who would be here tonight.
Yeah. I was right.
You were right. Yeah, you nailed it. We should have put money on that. So one of the gifts of MDMA as a therapeutic drug, I kind of missed the window for MDMA as a party drug, for better or worse. But one of the gifts of MDMA is it opens what's called a critical window. I imagine there's actually quite a few people in this room who know more about this than I do, but I'm going to give the very layperson's version. So after that first MDMA therapy, the marriage is is heading towards safer footings. It's opened up this sort of abyss in me, like, where did I come from? But there's something very special about that medicine, which is why it's so promising as a therapeutic and why it's so sad that yesterday the FDA de-recommended it for that use, which is another thing we can get into or not. But it opens something that's called a critical window. And my understanding of that is you're brought back to a time in your life, in early childhood, when you're learning, or I should say relearning in this case, the value of activities like bonding, like forming bonds with the people around you. And especially for people who have felt disconnected from their communities, from their partners, from themselves, it's a literal second chance. And I didn't know it at the time. That's exactly what I was experiencing. The way I described it in the book is that the walls had turned to sand. Meaning they're still there. I'm not hallucinating, But everything that I thought to be solid and have meaning assigned to it was suddenly up for grabs again. And again, I think of people who suffer from PTSD and other conditions, and what a balm that is for them, the second chance that we all want. Okay. So the sneaky therapist, the one who gently suggested we try MDMA, had an inkling that maybe there was more work to do. I'm having all these revelations that maybe my backstory is running my present day life. So she thought there was a way that we could do this. And after a few months of searching, she connected us with an ayahuasca circle. Any of you ayahuasca people? Sometimes I'll say, everyone close your eyes and then raise your hands. But it seems like we're in a safe zone for this. Yeah, okay. And as gentle and sort of loving as MDMA can feel, ayahuasca is different. I would describe it as challenging. But when it came to uncovering those early backstories, or early, I should say, preceding me backstories, it turned out to be the right medicine for the job. What the hell, I said, grunting under an armful of pillows and blankets. Is this really the place? As if Juliana's my wife, as if Juliana would know. As we trudged up the steep driveway, what had appeared to be a single house revealed itself to be a complex, a cluster of structures hunching under a wooded slope. A commune? The headquarters of a millenarian sex cult? The only response was the quiet twittering of birds. We'd only learned the address the day before, a quiet lane out in the Portland suburbs. If anyone asks why you're here, read the email, tell them it's for a breathwork session. Entering through the back door, we removed our shoes and stepped onto a carpeted living room furnished with tasteful Buddhist-themed artwork. A handful of fellow journeyers milled about or sat in anxious silence. Some were young people festooned with beads. One appeared to be a farmer, complete with a scraggly beard and grubby overalls. One or two had to be in their 70s. I wanted to ask them what was happening, but what was there to say? Hi, are we all about to die? So I gazed out the window and tried to steady my racing heart. Finally, a young woman in clanking jewelry materialized from the kitchen. Welcome, she said with a shy smile. Please follow me downstairs. The basement had all the charm of a freshman dorm. Inside a large and bare room, afternoon light filtered through tacked-up tapestries. Spread throughout the floor were 20 or so cushions with name tags. By each one, ominously sat a plastic bucket. Juliana was stationed at the other end of the room from me. As we dispersed to our pre-assigned spots, I gave her hand a final squeeze. At the head of the room, the facilitators, an older, slightly wizened man and a woman covered in tattoos of Sanskrit text, fussed over cups, candles, and sticks of incense. Now that everyone was gathered, I noted with a twinge of disappointment that we were all Caucasians. Here we were, just a bunch of white people partaking of yet another resource plundered from the Amazon. I quietly swallowed the thought as, one by one, we rose from our blanket-lined nests, approached the altar, and accepted a cup of ominous, sludgy-looking brew to bring back to our seats. As I sat in nervous silence, long-buried memories of my teenage journeys bubbled up. I felt at home in the psychedelic realms, wandering streets and alleyways shot through with ultraviolet light. What had I forgotten in the years since? The hour it took to serve everyone in the room was a nerve-wracking eternity. When my turn to approach the altar finally arrived, I studied the facilitators' faces, but they remained inscrutable. Welcome, said the man, peering deep into my eyes. What sized pour would you like? I hesitated a beat. Large, I think. What point was there in taking half steps now? I returned to my seat. The man gave a short blessing. We drank to honor Pachamama, Mother Earth, and we asked for the wisest counsel, the truest knowing, and the loving support of this container. As I raised that first cup of ayahuasca to my lips, the memory of those long ago teenage nights arose unbidden. That in a very dim sense, that I was not leaving myself behind, but journeying to a place that had waited a long, long time for my return. Makes me think of something. Is this thing in the right way? This feels very.
I think it's falling off.
I think it's
from this
falling
angle.
off too. There we go. Should have brought my clip-in ponytail on.
Yeah. Now, I feel like I want to help you.
I feel like I want you to help me.
No, you look good. Now you're good. You're good. Yeah. Consider yourself helped.
I appreciate your help in every way.
Let's not get that lost on this tangent. That was pretty.
No,
that was
no.
pretty.
It's all a moment.
Yeah. No, but what were you? Sorry.
Well, I think of something that I read about the psychedelic experience for other people. Remember being a kid and this notion that, well, you're going to take these drugs, or someone's going to give them to you. A pusher is going to give you drugs. And you're going to have these wild experiences and these visions, and they're going to take you out of yourself, and you're going to lose yourself. So why is it that so many people come out of these experiences with a sense of hyper reality? What they experienced there and what they were shown there was actually far more durable and far more true than what we experience here in the waking world. And I wanted to say one more thing before
Please.
I sense you have something, but this may resonate with the people who grew up in the same time and place that I did. But this is a complicated one. In fact, I'm gonna halt that sidebar right here. Save it. I'll say this: as a young person, the first political moment I remember in my life was the election of 1980, which dates me. I was 9 years old at the time, and I remember a very clear sense of watching TV over my father's shoulder and seeing camera pan across all these fields of white faces cheering on Ronald Reagan, and how terrifying I found it. I felt like, doesn't anyone else see this? This person who's saying, well, we need more weapons. We really need to get tough on the Soviets. And the sense of unreality, like no one else is seeing what I'm seeing, and I can't say it aloud. And so I'm thinking now of, like I said a moment ago, the sense of hyper reality, that what we're actually shown in these experiences is far more real than the sort of smoke and mirrors that we have to use just to get through everyday life.
Yeah. That really, I don't know, draws me to my own psychedelic realizations. Is just, I think, how little time most of us spend in the present in our day-to-day life. And it's totally set up like that. It's so easy to be in the future, like, thinking about what's next, especially if you have family, kids, things like that, all this. And then when we think about politics, these narratives, these grand narratives that we spend our time, we don't even ask for it. They're just bouncing around our minds all day long. And then to get into this inner reality, just the word you said is like going back home.
Yeah, a sense of homecoming.
One thing I want to ask is, was that a familiar sense? Had you felt that at other times, that sense of homecoming? Or was it brand new?
No, it was definitely hearkening to something very, very ancient in my own story. I think of the punk scene, the idea that I don't think anyone who came to that scene arrived without a sense of some essential contract with the world having been broken. Does that make sense? That here was a place where the outsiders actually belonged. And of course, there's sadness in that too. And we talked about that before we began. And there's a lot of people who burned out because they couldn't, I believe they couldn't hold that love. They couldn't be in community and feel that sense of belonging. It was too much for them to feel.
That's an interesting take.
Yeah, it just occurred to me. I don't know if I can't prove it, but
I saw it so much more from a land of like Peter Pan, like almost like there's no adults here. We can do whatever we want. Yeah. And then it just can kind of, there's also no guidance, no structure, but I do think like the mutual aid and support. And you also grew up in a time, or you were in that space in a time that was probably a lot more energy in the punk scene.
And it was a very specific time and place too. I mean, like, again, it's so sweet to have my friends from DC here because that was really unique. That this is a punk scene that was not organized around nihilism. or self-destruction at all. It was about, we're here for a reason, and let's make something of this.
Hmm.
Mhm. Hmm. The sidebar I was going to lead us down 90 seconds ago, I hear you clamoring for it, so
Give them what they want, Seth.
I have to. I would expect nothing less. So I began this by saying I'm a journalist, technically, in that I write articles and they're published. I wouldn't really call myself that. I think that's whatever. We can leave that out. But one of my real goals with this book was same thing I felt when I entered the punk scene. Like I felt like there was this whole world happening that was below the radar, below the surface, and people are having these incredibly transformative experiences, but no one's really talking about it. The few times I would read about psychedelics, maybe you remember there was a New Yorker article about a decade ago on ayahuasca. I don't remember the author. But there was something, it was beautifully written, like, everything published in that magazine, but it was so just kind of sneering in tone. Like, this is silly. There's nothing of value here. And I'll be honest, there's a lot silly in that world. I mean, this may be shocking to you. I'm not really the feathers and beads kind of guy. Sorry. There's a lot silly there. And yet people are having these deeply meaningful experiences, and no one's talking about them in a serious way. So that was a real shadow goal of this book, to make a literary work. I mean, at the risk of sounding more grandiose than I already do, that there was something worth talking about here. And what that leads me to, what my tangent is the archetype of the shaman. And I want to be really careful about that. That's not, trust me, not a title I claim for myself. A shaman in my world is a Caucasian man in his 30s with a ponytail, flowing light-colored garments, Birkenstocks, and you get the scene. And apologies if I'm insulting anyone in the room, or perhaps even in Berkeley. I'm not sure.
I know that guy. Yeah, he's actually really nice.
Is his name Seth?
Yeah.
But one of the gifts of this work and trying to discover what my backstory was is it brought me into touch with the notion of archetypes. And the shaman is a human archetype, meaning it's bigger than any one person. It's bigger than any one culture. And so we can't really ruin it. I mean, I'm sure there's a way to ruin it. But going back to the notion of looking at the world around me and seeing the unreality of it, seeing the nonsensical nature of electing politicians who wanted to harm others and so clearly were not caring for the people they profess to care for, made me think about the idea of a shaman. And the shaman, really beyond my caricature, is someone who at an early age is separated from their tribe. And it's typically by trauma or illness of some kind, but something happens and they take on the role of an observer and a storyteller, which is a gift, of course. And of course, there's a loss as well, because they lose their identity. They lose their sense of place within the tribe. And some cultures hold that well. I mean, that's a place of honor. I mean, it's nothing anyone, I think, elects themselves to, except maybe in our culture. Yeah. But they serve a purpose. They take on the sickness. My friend Paul Levy has written a lot about this, and he puts it so elegantly. A shaman is someone who can be subject and object at the same time. And so to my mind, that's someone who takes on the illness of the mass, the illness of the individual, and transmutes it, right? Which is also the act of writing, of course, too.
So you're not the shaman archetype, but you're pulling from it in some ways. Like,
what does it pay?
Yeah.
Is that,
shit. It's bad.
It's not good. It's a surplus of shaman.
Yeah, right now the market is like, it's all over the place. Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
I wouldn't know. So, okay. But I am really curious about this like step you're taking into hyper reality, kind of seeing, in this part of the chronology in the book or chronological timeline, and then realizing maybe, I don't know, I don't want to say fake. Life isn't fake, but like almost like there's this fraudulent life that we put ourselves into, we believe in, and then to see like did something crumble away for you? Did you feel like you had the right support, or was this like a real disintegration of self that took a while to get back from? I mean, you wrote a book about it, so I'm feeling like
I have
this
something to
might be
say.
a transition.
Yeah, no, it's funny. This thing is just not going to work for me, is it?
Do we have just having big heads? I think, I don't know. Mine's.
Yeah. Here we go. Ish. You can hear me. Yeah, right? Everything's working. I'm just totally freaking out.
I'll try to cool it on the questions, man. Yeah.
You know, someone asked me this last night at dinner, which I really appreciate. We had to talk about what I call medicine world, and yeah, my life had to fall apart to an extent. I think in the months after those first MDMA sessions and then falling into ayahuasca world, I really clung to this book because I didn't know what the fuck else I was doing with my life. Everything seemed to be in free fall. Nothing that I'd been able to count on for the first 40 plus years of my life seemed to be true anymore. So writing the book saved me. And I often tell people that the book wrote me as much as I wrote it. What happened in the 3D world was that friendships and relationships that had carried me this far sometimes couldn't make that leap.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be really careful how I say this because I'm sensitive to the notion that I'm disparaging friendships or people in my life. But what I'm trying to say is that I found that I wanted depth, and I wanted presence, and I wanted to be truly vulnerable and intimate with people. I felt like having conversations about movies and food is great. It's wonderful. But if there wasn't a possibility for a deeper connection and a deeper meaning making, and why are we here and doing this? That kind of had to drop away, and it was painful, and then it just became easier.
Was that a dark time for you, or did it feel like you were almost shedding some weight?
I was shedding weight. Thank you. Yeah. Also, the purging aspect of ayahuasca helped me shed a lot of weight as well.
Yeah. People get really into that. That's my biggest concern about ayahuasca fans is like, you're throwing up a lot. How's your esophagus?
That is everyone's top fear, right? I don't want to throw up. And I get it. It's not that much fun.
But there's something symbolic about it. It's so potent. There's
deeply meaningful. Yeah. Deeply meaningful. I mean, if MDMA is a sort of clinical way for us to access our backstories and our emotions and our connectivity, ayahuasca is a wild, dark, uncontrollable other pathway. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing predictable about it, and there's nothing safe feeling about it.
Yeah, it's kind of punk rock.
It is very punk. Yeah, wow. What's the most punk psychedelic? No, not a question you're actually asking, I sense. Yeah.
This is a good time for audience participation, y'all.
I'm actually just bringing up punk. One of the things, and I was in the West Coast scene more than DC, and I know DC had a really different kind of thematic movement behind it. But part of it's just interesting hearing you talk about hyperreality and that sense of disconnection, because my experience in the punk scene was like we wanted to feel the way it really felt in the world. Yeah. Like it's ugly, it's messy.
Yes.
I'm scarred. Mm-hmm. The world feels scarred. My clothes don't look the way other clothes look, and so I wonder if that was sort of also what drew you, or if that was part of your immersion in that scene, because I don't know the DC scene as well. But out here, a lot of it was like, ugliness is okay.
Yes.
We are ugly. Like I grew up in Portland. It's like, where you are now, it's much less sleepy than it was then. I mean, much more, it was more sleepy. And it was a lot of like suburban, like this is not what the world feels like. Like that guy's killing people and this awful thing is happening. Mm-hmm. And we wanted it ourselves to match what it felt like in the world.
Yeah, that rings so true. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think for me, punk was as much an orienting towards this is what we are not, as it was to this is what we are, and which is why I feel that scene was so vibrant and so diverse. And people didn't dress in leather jackets. Some people did, but it was all kinds of people who just saw like, well, this is this void that we can all safely occupy ourselves. I also want to point out that what you're naming, we're going to rub your face in the grit of it, is an actual line of dialogue from, I believe, both Chips and Quincy MD, when the good guys try to bust up the nasty punk band. In Chips, I forget the band name, but I remember their song. It was called "We Dig Pain." All right, like, yeah, we're going to show you how it really is.
Well, that is another version of hyperreality, right? It's like, I mean, I was so attracted to that. I mean, luckily I'm a big guy and everything, but the mosh pit, the stage diving, all these things of like, and like everybody's lined up to get punched and to get like elbowed and to get thrown on the floor. And as soon as you're down, it's just smiling faces helping you back up. Like you felt that. That was so real, right? Yeah. And I feel like there's something about knowing you're about to puke your brains out and experience like this ayahuasca journey that's not that dissimilar.
So that brings two things to mind. One, I was laughing when you said that because my experience of going to shows was, please let me not get punched. I don't want that to happen.
Maybe that was a step too far, but
yeah. But we were actually talking about this before the presentation. So here's the thing about psychedelics and some of the ways they're rolling out into the world. Pardon me. One of them is through what I call medicine world, like the world of ceremonies, which are underground, and they use medicines like psilocybin and ayahuasca and toad, like more obscure ones. There's no regulation. It's a social group, and they're underground by nature, and there's no oversight of any kind, and they have value and they have drawbacks. And then there's the white lab coat model, in which well-funded companies are doing things like patenting versions of natural substances so that they can sell them. And this notion that you can, to my mind, the pitch is basically take this pill and it's going to be okay. You're going to wake up someone else. And
it's the same pitch. That's the same pitch. It always is. There's people kayaking on the commercial,
right?
Like having a great time. Yeah.
And to me, what you name about the punk scene and the value of that experience is the same as the value of the danger and the real challenge of the psychedelic experience. I mean, I see it as a parable. Sitting through something like an ayahuasca ceremony, and trust me, I'm not at all positing myself as a exemplar of heroism or anything of that nature. But it's really hard, and you'll meet yourself in ways that you never had before. And as those punks sang, your face will be pressed in the grime.
Yeah.
There's a real value in that. Hard isn't bad. And I think that and the notion that I didn't actually have to believe my thoughts were the two biggest takeaways of the time spent in ayahuasca and other medicines.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I'm really having this moment with. No, it's good.
Yeah.
You wanna? All right, cool. Well, just thinking like, there's this part about that narrative that's like, take the pill, then you're good. And it's like, if you took the hero's journey and just got rid of every other part of like the journey, except like the beginning and the end, like that's it. Right. And then psychedelics, like, as we know, people talk about, I'm doing a lot better now. I was doing bad. Now I'm doing good. Cause that's like, that's the story we talk about. We all have that cultural story. Cause it's just like, I don't want to say it's propaganda, but it's just so easy, right? And it's just what's around us.
Do you mean like it's taboo to talk about the challenge?
Not even, but that's just like, we just want to say psychedelics helped me. Like they saved my life. They're great.
You want the takeaway.
Right. Yeah. And then that's kind of what gets hyped up. This, this big story that's like in all the newspapers is like, it's good. The numbers are good. It's helping people. But this really crazy thing that happens to everybody is totally different for everybody. That happens in between. I just love that part, and that's where I think it's the most exciting.
Yeah, and maybe that's personality based. Maybe that's not a mass market sell. I could be wrong.
Yeah,
but I also think about so in one of the talks I said something unintentionally disparaging about solo journeys, about inwardness, about medicines like ketamine, in which people are after an experience or two in a clinic, they're basically given the drug, say, go home and take this. I said, there's something that sort of rubs me wrong about that. And then I have to be honest, on Sunday, I spoke at a medicine church and spoke with a therapist there who was saying, it's actually incredible. These people are taking the medicine on their own. I'm there to support them, but they're having these big experiences no matter what. And so, like, my own biases in what kind of experience you're supposed to have, or maybe even what type of medicine you're supposed to have. Yeah, maybe that's useful. It sounds like it's not.
Yeah, we bring a lot of our baggage to our own healing and share that with others, don't we? Seems pretty common. Did you want to say something?
Can you bring us back to the Holocaust?
If you could just
This keeps happening.
I mean, when you were in a journey, did ancestral memories come for you? Was there intergenerational trauma that you worked out?
I would love to tell you about that. I'm sorry, I'm just so tickled that you asked me to return to the Holocaust. I appreciate that. I mean that. Oh yeah, the Holocaust. Okay, right. So here's the deal. I definitely had some experiences that put me in touch with what little I knew about my ancestor's story. So from what I read earlier, I'm having these experiences and realizing, oh, there's more of a backstory than I thought, right? What I didn't name is that at the same time, I'm starting to research. Like, I need to know, like, what was Hungary like in this era? What was the world into which my father was born, into which my grandparents were born? And so I'm learning a lot outside these experiences too. And what I recognized, and this was entirely new to me, was that I knew a little bit about my dad's backstory, but for my grandparents, who raised me in some decent part at some pretty critical times, every minute of their adult lives, and I mean that literally, at the precise moment they were taking form and stepping out of their families and becoming adults, their experience was defined by fear. It was defined by trauma in ways I had been totally unaware. This is around the end of the First World War. And from my perspective, the war ends, thanks to us, obviously, and then everyone goes home and things are good again. Not so. In Hungary, where they lived, the end of the war unleashed, well, first of all, the flu pandemic, mass violence, 2 revolutions in 6 months, starvation, hyperinflation, 2 foreign invasions. It was a really, really awful time. And so I'm learning outside medicine, oh, the story that I imagined or barely bothered to imagine was really different than I thought. To answer your question, in medicine, yeah, I approached those. I was sort of metabolizing what I was learning and slotting that into my own experience. But the message I got was, this is not where you do that work. Meaning, you have to take what you're being shown here and you have to go out in the world and actually find the story for yourself. And in my case, what that meant was going to Hungary. I wouldn't say against my will, but definitely not in my plans. I literally heard a voice in the night. Sounds woo, sounds weird, sounds whatever, but that's just what happened. It said, go to Budapest, where I learned far more about what had happened to my family than I ever did in medicine work. Medicine work allowed me to touch on the feeling, on the sort of frequency, but it was the real world where I had to do the work, where to find this story was. And look, so far as I know, there's not currently any test that you can take to say, oh, well, you suffer from ancestral trauma. See, it says right here, we tested the gene expression. By which I would also say all of us as humans are experiencing ancestral trauma in some way or another. But if you're asking, did I have contact with past experiences, contact with moments in my ancestors' lives. No, I didn't experience that. Did I even slightly answer your question?
Yes.
Cool.
I mean, it sounds like you had like.
Yeah, there you go.
It sounds like you had, journeying experiences with ayahuasca or whatever the medicine was, and then you went out into the world, and there was a connection between them.
Yeah,
Is that right?
absolutely. Yeah. One was driving the other for sure. Yeah. In fact, maybe to that end, I can take the story out a little bit. So 5 years ago, almost to the day, I landed in Budapest, where I stayed for a month, and I basically had no plan. I had no idea where I should start. I didn't speak Hungarian. I have family there and friends. I don't speak the language. I don't know the culture. I just knew that I had to go and try to find anything I could. In Portland, around this time of the year, there are cottonwood blooms. Those happen here too. These sort of like white, tiny puffballs that float through the air. Do you get those here? No? Okay, they happen in Portland. They happen in Budapest. And literally from the start of the first day there, I realized that if I paid attention to them and followed them, they would take me to the right place. And this is one moment where that happened. A little backstory. I knew from my father's notes, he'd left some memoirs before he died. He wrote about 20 pages typewritten. That gave me a breadcrumb trail. So I knew that his way of escaping the Holocaust was by hiding in plain sight. He got a forged birth certificate, as eventually did many Jews in Budapest, that said he was Catholic. But what he did with it, which I still to this day find hard to grasp, he's 15 years old. He went to a civil militia office and volunteered for duty. He served on an ambulance, cleaning up after bomb raids. We, the British and the Soviets, were all bombing Budapest pretty heavily in 1944. So he put on this uniform to hide. The organization he joined was called LEGO. It's an acronym. I don't speak Hungarian. Lego Talmi Liga. LEGO. Keep that in mind. I've collected a list of offices and organizations where I might find a paper trail. The military archives, the Jewish genealogy archive behind the Dohonyi Street Synagogue. But the closer I get to these storehouses of certitude, the less certain I feel. What could these microfilms and records tell me anyway? The name of my grandfather's artillery unit or the high school my grandmother attended? These aren't facts I actually care about. It may not be facts I'm seeking at all. And so I look for the floating cottonwood blossoms instead. They seem to know where I'm headed before I do. Spring is in full bloom and the sky alternates between days-long rains and washes of golden glowing light. But the faces around me are not so sunny. As I walk the subway platforms and wait in comically long supermarket checkouts, I search Budapesters' eyes for kindness, but it's hard to find. Women's eyes are narrow beneath the brash hair coloring I call Eastern European red. Men's faces are pinched and hard, darkened by alcohol and sun. I see only hostile glares, and soon I stop trying to make eye contact at all. Still, I'm halfway through my trip before I finally admit how grateful I am not to have been born here. This morning, the cottonwood tufts lead me toward the castle district. I become fixated on my father's time in Lego. There's no mention of the organization in my references, and I want confirmation, some proof of my father's shockingly bold act of subterfuge. He wrote that there was once a photograph of him in uniform with his sister, her purse held in a studied way so as to hide the yellow star stitched to her overcoat. But it's long since disappeared. Just a mental image of him would help cement this crucial moment in the story. Lacking a visual reference, it feels gauzy and ephemeral. As I wander around the back of the castle complex, I stumble across a discreet stone-faced portal in the side of the hill. Sziklakorház, Hospital in the Rock. I've heard of it, but I can't remember where. Interesting, but not on my list of must-see sites. Plus, the entrance fee is steep by Budapest standards. But as I dawdle outside, a strange feeling comes. It's like an unseen hand on my chest. It feels like it's physically there, and I can't tell if it's holding me back or beckoning me forward. I wait. As if to underscore the hint, distant thunder booms off the Buddha Hills. I walk inside and buy a ticket. As I sit down inside the dinky theater, a wheezy digital projector plays a short introductory video. Now I understand the hand. The hospital was also a Lego command post. The film cuts to a snatch of wartime newsreel, and I go bolt upright, gape-mouthed. On the screen, an ambulance, military gray, a large red cross on its side, just as my father described, pulls up to the hospital entrance. Out leap 2 stretcher bearers, each in khaki overalls, and there's my father. It isn't. It can't be. It's not. The man's height and movements are wrong. But now a decades-old memory tumbles forth. I'm sitting in my father's lap, and he's telling me about this fantastical hospital, a series of corridors and chambers tunneled into the caves beneath the castle. He must have come here often. His Lego unit was sited just down the hill, roughly a mile away. The feeling inside my chest is nearly painful. Nervous receptors finally wake as these ancient signals finally reach my antenna. Time is bending back on itself, and I feel as though I'm back in ayahuasca. As much as the sheer chance of my stumbling upon this footage, it's the recognition that follows in its wake that floors me. In addition to their khaki overalls, each stretcher bearer wears a Stahlhelm, the iconic German-style helmet. Outside the swastika, it is perhaps the most recognizable symbol of Nazism. So far as the rest of the world was concerned, my father was a Nazi soldier. So, if that's not a medicine experience, I don't know what is. And what it awakened in me was a recognition of, so what does that do? What does that level of hiding do to a 15-year-old boy whose life and his family are in literal existential danger? And so you asked earlier, basically, why didn't I ask? Every signal coming from my family, and especially from my father, was, don't ask.
Mm.
And the fear and the relief and the shame that was so bound up in that moment. The trip to Budapest was far more psychedelic than any of the psychedelic parts. I can tell you that much. Please.
Hello, Seth and Seth. I wanted to ask you to go back to the Ronald Reagan, and because I wasn't sure if I understood your meaning. I think when I read that part, if I'm remembering correctly, what I thought you were saying was that seeing this political moment on the screen, even though you were a child, you had like and this is maybe me projecting my own ancestral trauma or whatever it is,
Yeah.
that you had a sense of fear of like mass politics, that like this person might want to do harm to me or my family or the world. And it just reminds me of like after the whole Trump trajectory, it's been like full of people being like, it's nothing, and then on one side, people being like, this is really bad and scary. And I remember on January 6th, I was freaking out.
Yeah.
And then other people I know were sort of like, did you see what happened? It's so silly. And I'm like, it is not silly.
It's not silly.
And to this day, people are kind of like, and there's a part of me that is, I think, very much the Ashkenazi Jewish part that's like, shit can go bad and you don't see it coming, people thought Hitler was a clown, for a long time. So anyway, so that's like, I wonder if you can talk about, I wasn't sure if I understood what you were saying about Reagan, if you were like seeing that, or if you were, because you were talking about also this sort of like the hyper real and the not real.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that kind of politics is like, it's very weird because you're kind of like, is it the not real or is it the hyper real? You
Yeah.
know, like it's really hard to tell what's the real. And this point, we're kind of like, it seems not real. And then like a whole lot of people just stepped into it, you know? So then it becomes real. Yeah. That's a rambly question. I don't know if it was a question.
No, perfect. And thank you. I mean, I'll say, like, on a personal note, it's a gift to me and informative and stirring for me to get reflections back from the world of how this story lands, because I realized, oh, right, that is what I was saying. I just maybe didn't know it. And the fear of mass politics. So, Nam, you asked earlier about ancestral trauma. Was that a moment that I could identify, like I'm experiencing someone else's or a past life moment? No, and yes, absolutely, because that fear of mass politics, as you put it, and the fear of political rallies. Maybe that's a normal childhood fear. I don't really know. I was certainly picking up on the silent signals. I remember the scene. I can't even see my father's face. I'm standing behind him. I don't know what his expression was. I don't know what his feeling was about seeing these rallies, but something was very definitely transmitting in that moment. And thanks for helping me see it. Yeah, for sure. I also want to name something too, at the risk of straying too far from the fun-loving Holocaust theme we've been on. I read a book called They Thought They Were Free. Anyone else read it? Fun. It's about Nazi Germany. But I just want to name one little thing. It's a fascinating book, and it came up during the first Trump administration. Yeah, sorry. Just see if you're paying attention. But after World War II, an American academic who was Jewish went to Germany on a fellowship, and part of his shadow mission, in addition to his regular job, he wanted to befriend Nazis. Like, why did you do it? And the interesting thing is he actually did become friends, 10 people. And the book is fascinating and a window into just the sort of normalcy of the hideous. And one of the things he pinpointed, which something you said stirred in me, was he called it rule by chaos, meaning here's a pronouncement. We're doing this now. And then a few days later, no. This is the thing. We have to focus on this. Everyone, we're doing this now. And then a week later, a new program. And a few days later, a new program and a new program. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Perhaps from the last administration? Not to go dark. Anyone? Questions, thoughts, fun-loving anecdotes?
Can you say more about how you understand your father, what happened to your father and his story? And I'm assuming you're making a connection to how you landed in a therapist's office with your marriage falling apart. And
Yep.
Yeah, can you
Tie those together?
I mean, if they're tied for you, I'm just
Absolutely, they're
curious.
tied.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Hiding. It's all about hiding. Hiding as a people, as Jews, hiding as immigrants in a place that you fear you may not belong, hiding as a man from emotional responsibility. I could go on. But my father's example, and please understand, I revere and miss my father. He's been gone 27 years now. But he was also working with the best he could. And the way he showed up in his family and in his marriages, multiple marriages, was a template for continuing that hiding. I mean, when you've learned to run, when is it safe to stop? Is it ever? To go even darker, if I may.
Dim the lights, please.
A lot of, so essentially every place I present about this book, at one point or another, the person booking it will say, well, are you going to talk about Gaza? And it's just too radioactive. It's just too divisive. And I say this, I'm not a political writer. I wrote a book about ancestral trauma. I wrote a book about how these messages and these source codes from the generations that preceded me were directing my actions in real time. I call them the wires and pulleys. Like, who's doing that? Whose lines am I reading? I think I had a very direct connection with that ancestral trauma. And how it manifested in my life was that I was doing things that were deleterious to myself, to my family, to my kid, to my friends, and I wasn't aware of it, and I didn't know why. So if you can think of any examples of a place in the world where that's being played out right now, that's my answer. And it was darkly confirming to hear through an intermediate that one of the top researchers on epigenetic trauma and Holocaust, children of Holocaust survivors, and psychedelics said precisely the same thing. It's ancestral trauma writ large. Sir. Oh, hold on, wait. She'll give you the mic. I keep forgetting.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about the role of psychedelics in helping you heal from the ancestral trauma, and the extent to which you've healed. I mean, I don't know that any of us ever heal fully. How they helped, which psychedelics helped in which ways. Really love to hear more about that.
Yeah, which ones did you bring tonight?
Tell you later.
So I'd actually like you to answer this too, if you feel called to. I'll give my spiel first.
Sure.
I'll say this: there was never any moment in which I said, "Oh, that element of ancestral trauma has been rewritten or changed." There was never any sort of one-to-one correlation. But as soon as I was aware that it was a possibility, that there was a mechanics to how these things control our gene expression, I realized that's a possibility, and it rings true to me. And just the observance of it as a phenomenon, that was it. Does that make sense? I saw there was a possibility. There was no moment in which, okay, that's it. It's a day-to-day, and sometimes hour-to-hour and minute-to-minute practice. Some days it's easier than others. That's it. Before the medicine work, I didn't know it was a possibility. Now I know that it's at work.
Yeah, thanks for passing that to me as well. And it's almost hard for me to say because I started using like cannabis at a pretty young age, like 16. It didn't feel that young at the time. I feel
16
like
16
16
months?
years. Yeah, right. I was in the womb still, 16 days from now. Yeah, but I just remember, at the very beginning, it was never this thing that was like, oh, this is so fun and comfortable. I mean, a couple times, but a lot of times it was like, I don't know why I'm drawn to this challenging experience with cannabis. I was like feeling a lot of stress in my body, like this like quaking, shaking. And eventually I feel like that really helped me embody and like get back to myself and not be as dissociated, which is a long process. And I totally agree with your statement. It's like a day to day, you're growing, it's like, I like to look at myself or people as like plants, trees or something like that. It's not a mystery how they grow. It's like they need sun, they need nutrition, and their limbs get longer, their roots reach deeper, they make new connections. And so these different substances, and I try to keep my focus on connection and on like the obvious next steps, the obvious growth for myself. And yeah, I think, for me, mushrooms have been a really huge ally because they've always been able to meet me kind of where I'm at. Other substances I've found to be a bit more aggressive and not always taking me like a clear next step. But yeah, ultimately, when it comes to like healing trauma or ancestral trauma, which substance is best, I think it's really about the relationship you have to it. And I encourage experimentation at like in that way, where you're really trying to build a relationship, not in the medical model where it's like, this molecule does what? Okay, cool, I want that. But really like, I don't know what this is going to do to me, you know, and I don't know what it's going to do to me in these conditions or in this location. So it's really been with that open mind to really help use them as allies to help me further my journey towards greater connection.
That spurs a question for you all. I'm part of this gigantic WhatsApp group, Jewish psychedelic world. It's insane. But someone posed a question today, talking about their elderly father, who sounds like could really benefit from access to above ground psilocybin care, but it's not available / prohibitive. Someone else was saying, well, they could go underground, but they would never go underground. My point being, my question is, if you're seeking this kind of support, how many of you would feel comfortable going to the underground, to some ceremony in a basement somewhere, and saying, I need this medicine. I don't care that we're not in a lab. Give it to me. Raise your hands. Okay. How many of you would only go to the clinic, to the oversight the medical model? Okay, just pure curiosity. Oh, wait, yeah, sorry, I keep forgetting. The mic thing.
Yeah, I had a question for you that's kind of along these lines. So for some context, I am a ketamine-assisted therapist. I also work with couples. So couples therapy is really dear to my heart. And I happen to work at a nonprofit that tries to make the above ground a little more accessible and a little more entwined with the original indigenous practices. And we do low-dose ketamine in a very slow process with a lot of integration. And our goal is to kind of bridge that gap between the lab coat model and the more ancestral practices. And so I kind of walk between those worlds. I'm also a descendant of Holocaust survivors myself, and bring that into my work with Jewish people and non-Jewish people. And I'm really curious to hear from you, kind of having experienced MDMA with a therapist, but in that underground space, and also the ayahuasca ceremonies. If you were to share something for the people who are bringing it into the above ground and trying to make it more intentional, less lab coat, but more accessible, what do you think is important to keep in mind for people working with ancestral trauma specifically?
Well, okay, I want to be clear here, because on the one hand, it sounded like you were asking, what would I say to practitioners who want to take their work above ground?
Yeah, from your experience, having underground experience, it sounds like, and working with the therapist who has therapy training and also has happened to work underground. So you've kind of seen sort of the in-between space as well. But as we kind of push to make it accepted by the powers that be, we're kind of in this bind of how do we bridge that gap.
But are you asking what I would say about ancestral trauma in particular?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that one's harder for me.
Yeah,
actually, that's
and open to just general things that you would want clinicians to know.
Here's what. So I'm probably not going to answer your question satisfactorily. I'll try my best. But what you're saying, what it brings up for me, Nikki, thank you so much. What your question brings up for me is this is a conversation that's really rattling around, especially this week for whatever reasons. As you know, yesterday I mentioned the FDA, right? And in case you folks are not following psychedelic policy, and trust me, I'm not going to get into this. I don't know enough, and I think you'd all fall asleep or die if I talk too much about it. The problem is not with the medicines; it's with the practitioners. And I do not consider myself to be well connected in the psychedelic world. I'm really an observer, but even through my paltry observations, the allegations of boundary crossing, data fraud, shoddy science, they go to the absolute top. There's no sector of this industry, and it is an industry, that is free of that. So when you ask about people taking their work above ground, my response is, well, what are they taking it to? Because right now, the world they're taking it to doesn't look too good from my perspective. In my heart, I feel like really caught between the two. Again, underground, lack of oversight, very potential for incredibly sloppy boundaries. Above ground, very expensive, potentially not as impactful, and also still sloppy boundaries. One of the reasons I was actually really excited to present with Seth is that his organization, to my mind, integrates psychedelics into people's lives in a way that is not completely spiritual, and you can correct me, please. It's certainly not religious, and it's also not the lab coat model either. And I would also say the psychedelic church I presented at on Sunday, which is a real joy, and I'm so pleased that some of the people I met there are here tonight as well. They're doing the same thing. They're integrating it into people's lives and saying, this is a support for us, and it makes us part of a more connected and a more conscious community. And that's it. It's kind of like the daily functional model of take the next right step, understand that we're on a path and healing doesn't happen in one night or one day.
Yeah. Well, we put so much emphasis on the preparation and the integration, and like so much of that model, those are great. But so much of that model assumes that we don't get to talk about it with people in our lives that we're close to. It's like, oh, I'm not going to talk about it with my grandma. You know what I mean? I'm not going to, but it's like actually having communities where, we're kind of discussing different things about our life. And, oh yeah, I'm thinking about doing a journey. Okay, who are you doing it with? Or you're solo? And, it's just like very natural conversation when you're in this community container, and it doesn't have to be overly stressed and can kind of come up naturally and meet you in that moment where you're at. Because I think we really put so much pressure on this moment to grow and to overcome all of our, and it's just not really real it happens. Cool. If you got that moment, bless you. But also to expect that is just.
You're putting a lot of pressure on yourself.
Yeah, that might be its own form of intergenerational trauma is like, I have to transform right now.
So good. I thank you so much. I'd like to name this one of, a lot of this book is about hearing voices, sometimes literal and sometimes figurative. And what I identified during it was this very insidious, very deeply buried voice that said, this was your only chance. And years ago, I asked a family member who knew my father in the 50s when he'd just come to the States. And I think was a far more traumatized individual than when I encountered him. I asked, perfectionism, what does that mean to you? What are the threads going back in time? And according to this person, this family member who's not naming for various reasons, my father's answer was, what perfectionism means to me is that when I was a teenager, maybe a dozen times a day, someone would look at my papers. If they were off, or if I turned left here and not right, and there was a checkpoint, that's it. That's what perfectionism is. And in the same way that being forced to hide by appearing to the world as a Nazi soldier, those same messages, I have absolutely no doubt, were transmitted upwards in time. And as I say this, honestly, I have emotion at the ways in which I transmitted that to my kid as well. And I'll just say, thank God that I found this work when I did, and I'm working to do what I can to stop that chain. So, oh wait, the mic. By the time we're done tonight, I'm going to remember that everyone needs the mic before they speak, if it matters.
Thanks. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what shifted inside of you as a result of the work that you did with psychedelics that felt like a healing, and how that relates to the generational trauma that came down through your family.
Mm-hmm. I think the simplest way I could put it is that I think for many people who okay, I won't speak for, actually, I will not speak for anyone else. I'll speak for myself. Growing up feeling separated from other kids, feeling separated from my community for all the reasons I've named, kind of an outsider, not really belonging. It's a very safe and comfortable place to retreat into hyper-cerebrality. Well, your brain is everything. You can think your way through inwards thoughts, circular thoughts, living in the mind. So for me, the recognition that my thoughts maybe were not trustworthy and that maybe I was not my mind, it's hard to say it in simple words, but that's what I experienced. That maybe my mind wasn't actually me, and that something else, something deeper, maybe even my soul, was more durable and more trustworthy. That's a very wishy-washy sounding answer, but it's also kind of the truest one I can give. About 8 minutes from now, I'm going to think of much more to say, and maybe I'll come to it.
As I make my way through the book, there are more and more references to code switching. And then hearing you tonight, and you're talking about silence, I'm wondering if silence is an extreme form of code switching. Silence as opposed to revealing the family secrets. And here I'm looking for clues in my life and a lot of people's lives is how do we tune into this possibility of ancestral trauma? And I think this history of code switching and looking into the silence is where it's at. And I was wondering what you thought.
I absolutely agree with that. I think, I mean, the notion of the masks we wear in our different settings, in our jobs, in our romantic relationships, in our families, and that's normal to an extent, right? We read the room and we change our behavior, but going back into my own family story as deeply as I did, and recognizing mask after mask after mask, not as a way to fit in on a social level, but on a really existential level. And that's what people trapped in environments like Budapest in 1944 had to do. It was existential. Again, I'm going to struggle to express it correctly, but I think there's a notion of I feel like a sense of an interior void where the true self resides, free of all those masks. And I think for each of us, it's the work of showing up is actually slowing down and recognizing that you are wearing masks, and maybe that's okay. And maybe you have just, my wife calls it slowing down the reel of film. There's a film feeding you your lines, telling you how you act in this case. And maybe just every so often we can slow the reel down a little bit and recognize that we don't have to read those lines. And we don't have to wear those masks.
Can I
Please.
double click on that a little bit? It's the term ancestral trauma is a little cerebral, actually. I'm picking up. It's a pretty big concept. And it's in opposition, I would say, to what you're really talking about. And I want to ask more, because I had this experience where I was like, I don't fucking know. Sorry, I don't think I can swear. I don't know my parents, really.
Yeah.
They raised me. Only people I've been around, really. And I don't know them. And you could ask, if you ever my parents, they'd be like, tell me about that phase when Seth was interviewing you a lot, and I was just like asking them all their stories. And I'm just curious, like, did you get to have that? Did you get to have the other side? Did you get to be curious and really engage with your family members on a deeper level? And, and if so, like, what came of that? Were you able to unlock, like, and get into a new dynamic with them?
Well, I'll say this: a lot of the book hinges on discoveries, like found footage. Found isn't the right word, of long lost relatives literally sending me photos of my grandfather from the First World War, or sending a reel of film from 1938. My sidebar. So far as I know, I think 4 objects left Hungary with my family: an oil painting, an upholstered chair back. Yeah, literally, my grandmother like crocheted it and they took it. And a reel of film. So that's 3 objects, like 8mm film, home movie camera. But somehow this film made it to me. And so I had a chance to read my father's recollections and then watch them happening too. So I didn't as much get to go deep with those ancestral figures, many of whom were dead, obviously.
Sure, yeah.
Some were not. But I got to commune in the ways I was able to, that were deep and meaningful.
Yeah.
The one way that is contrary to this is that since our father's death, my sister and I had been very distant. We'd been friendly, but distant, not emotionally intimate. And as a result of going on this trip to Budapest, where she joined me for 1 week of the month I was there, was an absolutely life-changing gift, because I rediscovered my sister, and that bond persists to this day.
Wow.
And if nothing else had happened with the book, that'd be enough.
Cool. It's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. I guess I'm just really trying to ask from this place of, if we look at ancestral trauma as something that we collectively want to end, I mean, just as like a vibe, that'd be cool. How do we act on that? How do we get into the grit of it? How do we rub our face in it in the punk rock way, the DIY mentality?
Well, I don't have an answer. Well, let's just get that clear. But I did stumble upon something the other day talking with Paul Levy, who I referenced earlier, who's a lifelong Jungian Tibetan Buddhist, deep writer and thinker. And what I said is, yeah, ancestral trauma is the human wound, in a sense. I mean, I don't believe anyone is entirely free of it.
Mm-hmm.
I have to think, just on a sort of heart level, that the cultures that are better at expressing grief and staying connected with their lineage, I have to think they suffer less of it. Because I think of, in my life, in my family, in my culture, the utter divorce from difficult emotions, from death, from the aging process even, from history, from lineage, the lack of initiation, all the things I've been naming tonight. I think that's what it feeds on. That's just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Yeah. It is 8:37. We've been sitting here for quite a while. The room is somewhat stuffy, to be honest. I feel like if there's a burning question or two, I'd love for us to address them if that's called for. I'd also invite, I did bring books, and I'd be so pleased if you care to purchase them. I would facilitate that purchase. That's it.
Thank you. I'm just curious if you would speak to how you feel like healing generational trauma heals our ancestors.
Yeah. That is a really common sensation that people in the psychedelic experience have. So common that I have to think there's something to it. Maybe there's suggestion, maybe whatever, but I felt it personally, absolutely. And I think I'm not a Buddhist, but I think of the Buddhist concept of the hungry ghost that wanders among us and is never satiated, but is lacking something that they couldn't find in this life. I'm horribly mangling that metaphor. But that's how I experienced my ancestors. I'm thinking of my father, I'm thinking of my grandmother in particular, two of the people who had a really pivotal role in raising me. And there was a kind of putting down, I don't know how better to put it, but a sense of meeting them in medicine and something being fulfilled, of me recognizing them in the totality of their traumatized, fucked up lives and being able to say, it's okay. I'm okay. I made it. I made it. You don't have to worry anymore. And that was deep. And maybe that's my own imagination, but whatever. Yeah, kind of a sense of a contract being fulfilled. Yeah. I was talking with Patricia earlier about what the act of going to Hungary to find my family story and really to find my dad's story meant. And what I realized was that for the past 20 years, he'd been dead, but he'd left these, I call them dangling threads, these little clues to follow, never knowing if I actually would, but of course I would. And by going to Hungary and tracing down his story, like the bit I just read you, and sort of releasing it, that was putting him to rest too. That's my belief. Yeah, thanks for asking. You guys, we did a thing. Oh wait,
there was one more.
Is there one more? Okay, sorry. No, please.
I want it.
I could talk for so long.
We got the comfortable chairs, so.
Well, I'm curious, since you've been talking about like ancestral trauma and you're placing yourself in your own lineage, what do you feel like you're now not passing along? Like what stops with you in your lineage going forward? What do you hope, maybe?
Hope, thank you.
Okay, what do you hope?
Yeah, because I think some of my most challenging moments as a parent, my kid is now 17, is when I recognize what I have not been able to stop, what I have been unconscious of. I can't name any specific moments or any specific traits. I don't believe I can. But there's sort of, I think about life as a theater, and there's moments in which I recognize I'm playing a role that was handed down to me. And for whatever reason, maybe this is because I'm from a Jewish family, it happens in the kitchen, right? The kitchen is a place of reward and punishment and withholding and shaming and joy and all these things wrapped up. That's my feeling about it personally. And so when I'm in the kitchen with my daughter, who basically, at this point, if I walk into the kitchen, she's there, like, nope, my kitchen, not yours. It just is slowing down the reel of film. And I don't catch myself all the time, but it gets easier. I mean, that's, to my mind, that's the concept of neuroplasticity, right? At a certain point, you're making a choice in real time, and you're trying to just make it more and more conscious each time. So a non-answer, I'm afraid, but that's what it means to me. Yeah, and thank you for asking it.
Could I shoot for one more? Just a quick. A theme that I think we came up, but we didn't really go deep on, was initiation. And I was wondering if we
initiated a little bit of initiation.
A little
early.
bit. I was wondering if we could maybe just like close that thread out a little
Yes.
bit, because I am still curious. Do you feel, is this book, is this writing, is this a moment for
God.
you? Give me something that I can leave with and be like, he's been initiated. I understand.
Oh, thank you for that.
Yeah, I want to understand.
Thank you. I was trying to explain this last night to someone who was questioning me very probingly on what is this book for? Who's it for? What is it for? What did it do? And I was trying to name how disconnected and bereft my life was beforehand. 10 years ago, my life looked very, very different. And so much so that I was the person who would walk into therapy with my wife, perfectly capable of just dropping it all and letting it all happen to me, and what that would do to my daughter and what it would eventually have done to myself. And near the very end of the book, actually, I won't read it, but there's a moment from the conference that you referenced, the Judaism, the Psychedelic Renaissance, which I helped co-found. And I presented on the book a few years ago. It wasn't done yet. And the very last question in the room was, are you healed? Which I was so grateful for. It's what I wanted. And I said, look, I am self-absorbed, clueless, selfish, neurotic, all the things. But I was not participating in my life. I was living behind a sheet of thick glass. I'm present for my family. I understand to the best of my ability when things like those ancestral tape loops are dictating my actions. And I'm out in the world and I'm sharing something that I think is of deep value. And it's hugely meaningful to me to get these early reflections back from the world, many from people I've never met who say, I see myself in this book. That's huge. So, yeah, I'm healed.
Sick.
Thanks.
Thank you, Seth. This has been a fantastic talk. So poignant and touching and funny all at the same time, impressively so. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming out. Yeah, as Seth mentioned, there will be books for sale in the hall. I think we're taking like Venmo. Is that what it is?
Oh boy, so you can pay in cash. I have change for you for that. Or there's a QR code. It'll take you to the site. You click a thing. You put in your credit card and your Swiss bank account number.
Right, exactly. And that's actually, the instructions are listed out there, so
Yeah.
you don't have to do all that from scratch. Thank you for coming to the Alembic. If you enjoyed your time here and you want to learn more about what we do, please hop on our website, berkeleyAlembic.org, and sign up for our newsletter. It's really a fun newsletter. And also just to let you know about some upcoming events, if you want to just dive right back in. On Friday night, we have Miriam Peretz here teaching Turning Towards the Heart, which is a Sufi whirling class. And it's really like, talking about alternative ways or like ways of getting into transformative space. Sufi whirling is a trance practice, essentially. And she invites in beautiful, like really talented musicians. And so it starts with the class and then it moves into just a dance with the musicians. So it's a really beautiful class. And then next Wednesday, we have here a celebration with the Women's Visionary Council. And that is some of the pioneering women in the psychedelic history. And they're going to be putting on an event here called Tram Day in celebration of Susie Ramstein, who was with Albert Hoffman on Bicycle Day when he went home on a bicycle, the first person to take LSD. She is the first woman to take LSD. So it's a celebration of Susie Ramstein and women in psychedelic history. And that's going to be here next Wednesday. It's going to be really awesome.
And she took the tram home, right?
She took the
was
tram
thing?
home.
Yeah, okay.
She didn't
Public
take a bicycle
transport,
home.
LSD. I mean, it's so.
It's actually much more cool.
It was an educated choice.
Yeah, it's a lot more responsible. Yeah.
She was the first person to ever sit with somebody on LSD. So for sort of like, LSD guide. So that's going to be really awesome. That's going to be here, Tram Day, next Wednesday. Please feel free to hang out in the lounge, have tea, talk to people, and you're welcome to stay for a while. So thank you all for coming out. I really look forward to having you back.
Yeah.
Thank you again, both of you.
Thank you.
now.